Just waiting for. Okay. I think we're ready to get started. Dawn, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. You want to bring up our one slide?
Sure.
There we go. Okay. So I'll kick us off. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I wanted to start, Dawn and I have a very brief presentation, probably just 10 minutes, and then we're going to take your questions and comments, but I just wanted to sort of set the stage for this. For any of you who aren't aware, I'm Jim Roos. I'm the mayor currently, and with me today, I also have Dawn Murdoch. Dawn, also a member of the city council, and she currently serves as the mayor pro tem. And together we are an ad hoc committee of the city council to consider La Venta. And I would like to start just by providing some context about the path that we have been on with respect to La Venta for folks who may have only heard about this activity recently. For about a year and a half, the city has been engaged in a discussion with La Venta's owners and the operator and neighbors in the vicinity of the property to discuss ways to mitigate the impacts of noise and parking. This process started at the Planning Commission in 2021, and there they conducted a series of public meetings on the topic and recommended a draft ordinance to the City Council early last year. That ordinance took the form of what is called a zoning text amendment, and so you may this evening hear individuals refer to a zoning text amendment or a ZTA for short. The City Council considered that ordinance in the spring of last year, and I think for a variety of different reasons, each council member having their own reason, found it inadequate. And later the council decided to create an ad hoc committee consisting of the mayor pro tem and me to consider the issue and return to the council with our recommendations. In that month since then, since probably about September, Dawn and I have been taking meetings with a large number of interested parties. We met, of course, with the owners and the operator of La Venta. We've met with many of the neighbors in the vicinity, and we've also met with other interested parties who don't live anywhere near the property. During a council meeting last month, we presented draft terms, which you see on your screen right now. And I want to emphasize that what you see here on this is a list of ideas. It's intended to be the starting point for a public discussion. These are not intended to be our recommendations to the City Council. We presented them at a City Council meeting for the purpose of entering them into the public domain so that we could share them with you this evening and collect your feedback. Any and all of these terms are subject to change, and our recommendation to the council may include only some of these recommendations or none of these items. So tonight, Dawn and I will briefly describe each of the terms under consideration and then take your questions and comments. You will probably not hear Dawn or I advocating a position. Our goal in this meeting is really just to listen to your feedback and answer any questions. And I'd also like to encourage folks to, anyone who hasn't done so already, to submit written comments to laventacomments@pvestates.org. Dawn and I are only two of your 5 city council members, and so submitting written correspondence enters it into the public record and ensures that our colleagues will also hear your voice. So with that, I think Dawn and I will take turns here just sort of going over at a high level some of the items that we have considered and we are accepting public comment on today. At the center of La Venta is the issue of noise, and to a certain extent that is a product of how many people are at events. So the first consideration was event size, and we've considered a couple of different options, one for seated dining with a limit of 135 people, and a second limit for cocktail service with a limit of 200. We've got on this possible limits on event frequency, large events, those exceeding 75, no more than 2 days in a row, and then limiting the number of events per day except on Saturdays during the summer. We've talked about limiting the event timing so that events have to end by 10 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays and then 9 p.m. on other days. Talked specifically about the use of the parking lot and that it should be used for parking and not for events. And limits on other uses of outdoor space, such as outdoor prep that's sometimes been done outside, the time of day that trash is picked up, and any drinking beyond the courtyard. Another big issue, of course, is parking. The facility has fairly limited parking, and we are considering the option of requiring guests to park on the lot, and then making limited areas of the public street available for staff parking, requiring a parking attendant. And we have some proposals that we would consider referring to the Traffic Safety Committee for mitigating parking in the neighboring streets, that is restricting parking and requiring permit parking. There is some very specific language that we've considered about outdoor activity, limiting the length of ceremonies. Ceremonies tend to have one of the larger impacts on neighbors because they typically have amplified audio. And so limiting the ceremony period to 60 minutes, limiting what can and cannot be amplified, and ensuring that outdoor activity ends at 8:30 p.m. And then in terms of music, which outside of in the limited case of ceremonies is mostly an indoor activity, we were considering requiring that percussive instruments not be used on the property, and some limits, some guidance on calibration of audio equipment. We also have a possible proposal related to sound monitoring. And this would, I'll go into a little bit of detail here. There's some complexity around this. There's a lot of different ways to measure and account for sound. And what we're considering right now uses what's called LEQ 60-minute average, which is different than, say, it isn't like one big noise exceeding 52 decibels would trigger that. This represents an average over a period of 60 minutes. So it's sort of like if you continuous sound of 52 decibels. And then we were considering that only after 8:30 p.m. And then notice requirements for the operator to make neighbors aware of when events are happening. I think some pretty basic things that everyone would agree on regarding the requirement for a business license and the direction of sales tax towards the city of PVE. And then an annual review process to be led first by the community development director and submitted to the planning commission. And then finally, we were considering enforcement provisions. Each individual item on this page would be enforceable potentially individually. And so for each one, any one of those would be subject to a first or second offense warning, and then with a dollar fine that comes on third and fourth and subsequent offenses. But I'll emphasize that again, that means, so for example, if you exceeded the event size and got 2 warnings, and then later you exceeded the event timing, that would not be a third offense. It would be a warning against a different provision here. Dawn, anything you want to add there?
No, I think you covered it quite succinctly.
Okay. So that more or less concludes our presentation. And we would like, if you would like to speak, let me ask you to use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little smiley face, and you can raise your hand to be put into the queue for questions. We have scheduled this meeting to run until 8 p.m. and we'll do our best to work through everyone who wants to speak. If you don't get the time, if we run out of time and we have to end the meeting at 8 p.m. and you haven't gotten a chance to speak, please feel free to reach out to me and Dawn directly, and we will very happily chat with you. There's a lot of folks on this call tonight, so we are going to limit the comments or questions to about 2 minutes. If you go past 2 minutes, you will automatically be muted. But we'll go ahead and address any questions you had or respond to your comment if that is appropriate. But don't take offense. We're just trying to give everyone an equal opportunity to speak. And then I just want to remind folks there's people who will be coming to this issue from a variety of different perspectives, and we'll ask that everyone just try to be respectful of everyone's thoughts on the matter, and we will try to do the same. And I think we're ready to take questions then, Dawn?
Let's do it.
Okay, the first hand that I have up is Virginia Butler. I will unmute.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having this forum. I have been a resident and active businesswoman realtor in our beautiful city since 1982. So I have a lot, over 41 years of experience with living here, working here, and being very familiar with La Venta Inn. La Venta Inn is older than our city itself. It is a prominent and well-loved landmark. It belongs to the entire city, not just 15 residents. And the outcome of these decisions will affect our entire city. The loss of it as a site for residents and others to attend would be a travesty. I think residents come and go, but it has stayed standing for over 100 years. My understanding professionally is that the residents, the vast majority were told or observed that La Venta Inn operated as a site of events when they bought the property. They ended up having a few years reprieve because of COVID, but then when that lifted, now it seems like they haven't quite remembered that or realized that they agreed to buy there and knew that this was going to be happening. I appreciate the council listening, but it seems like it's gotten to the point of the tail wagging the dog. I've been to several of these meetings, and I know the council's bending over backwards, including at this moment, to listen to these 15 residents' concerns. But I think it's time that we kind of take back ownership and the idea that this is affecting all of our residents. The catering company's owner, Meg, is a city resident raising her children here. She has already bent over backwards with so many concessions. And when I see the suggestion list, some of these event size, frequency.
Okay. Thanks, Virginia. I think your time has expired. Dawn, did you, anything you wanted to respond to there?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Virginia. Appreciate that. Joan Davidson, you're up next.
Hi. Vanderlip was brilliant when he built the Venta Inn, where buyers enjoyed the view and bought a lot. As the 100th birthday of PVE is here, we need to ensure the historic character that includes the Venta Inn. It has been enjoyed by movie stars, famous persons, locals as a venue for bar mitzvahs, PTA luncheons, marriage ceremonies, etc. It's now in danger if we cannot keep this iconic venue. Although the council might not close the Venta Inn intentionally, it could close if it cannot make the profit margin needed. We're in a precarious position. For 75 years, the Venta and PVE has allowed wedding and other ceremonies outside. The celebrations have become the PVE tradition and standard, and one could argue an ordinance. Parking. Please ensure that those who have events use it valet and park along Del Monte on the east side of the road. And for noise, you could have La Venta install a glass sunroom around any tables that are put outside for dinner and limit the noise. I've heard it said that the council is not trying to shut down La Venta, but the unintended consequence of adopting stringent ordinances will make it impossible for the owner to stay in business and can result in closure. To limit the guests to 135 may not be enough to cover their costs. Noise can be addressed by creative means. La Venta Inn is adjoining 2 other properties or lots. These lots could be sold off as separate lots, and according to Senate Bill 9, each lot can build up to 6 units per lot. PVE will have no authority to stop a buyer from building 6 units on each lot, according to Senate Bill 9. La Venta has been a sales office and an inn where movie stars dined, movies were made. The famous beautiful weekends, and it needs the council's immediate attention to protect and preserve our historic character. Please keep your campaign promises to protect and preserve this.
Thank you, Joan. Really appreciate that. Next is John Williams.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have a suggestion and a question in addition to my lengthy written submittal. My suggestion is that you need to consider additional sources of revenue to the city in addition to the business license and sales tax. I don't think those are adequate. The reason is there are expenses associated with monitoring and enforcement, which won't disappear with the new ordinance. If anything, they increase. And specifically, the city needs to own sound monitoring. It can't be outsourced to the entity being monitored. That leaves us with a fox and a hen house to consider. Now, how to do that? I prefer a head tax since problems are more or less proportional to the number of people. And it is a hotel after all. But it's not just Venta that has to be viable. That goes double for the city. We need a viable civic enterprise. Councilmember Lotzi in the January 11th meeting noted there is some inconvenience, significant inconvenience to a section of our residents, and we need to be compensated for that. So that's my suggestion. My question, actually two questions. The city council approval of the ad hoc term sheet included direction to engage an independent sound consultant. That was delegated to the city manager who may not have gotten around to it. What is the status? And then my other question, will the ad hoc incorporate the consultant's findings into its recommendations? If so, the current plan to draft a ZTA by February 15 is not realistic. Some may say it is too late to engage a consultant, but that suggestion actually surfaced 9 months ago in the May 3rd Planning Commission meeting, and again in the first City Council meeting on June.
I will, thanks, John, for that. Let me address a couple of the questions, and I'll give Dawn an opportunity to respond also. I'm not sure what the status of the consultant is. Obviously, the council did give that direction to the city manager. I anticipate, I don't know if Dawn, you know what the status is, but I anticipate he'll be working on that to identify a consultant to present to the council for authorization to actually fund it. I also wanted to just correct something in part of your statement that what the city council did in January was not approve the list of items that are on our draft. They merely approved our moving forward with this public comment period. And as for the timing, I don't think that Dawn and I have considered how we fit the sound consultant into the timing of this. We were originally hoping to come back to the council with our recommendation in this month. Whether or not we're able to do that will depend on a number of factors. Dawn, anything you want to add?
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add is I think the hiring or the decision to hire a sound consultant, while it was something that was discussed in January, and we did ask for the city manager to look into it, I think the actual hiring will probably be a component of our next conversation. And so I don't know that we'll actually hire them before we bring to council our next recommendation. So a lot of it's going to depend on what comes out of the final set of comments that are sent through February 8th. Yeah, February 8th, and what we hear this evening. So I don't expect us to be pulling the trigger on that quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We can come back with recommendations prior to a sound consultant. Sound consultant can be part of that recommendation potentially. So, all right, thank you, John. Now up next, I have John Tang.
Hi, thanks for taking letting me speak. I've been a 15-year resident homeowner in Palos Verdes Estates, and Venta has been here for over 100 years. I like to second a lot of what Virginia Butler just mentioned. these 15 residents apparently who have a beef with La Venta, their prices of their homes were based on the fact of their proximity to La Venta. And now the fact that now all of a sudden we're stifling this business from being able to do what it's been doing for so many years seems like a money grab to me. Get rid of a business and perhaps raise the value of their homes. It doesn't seem right to me. The other thing too is this sends a bad message to other businesses that would consider coming to Palos Verdes. The beach cities are full of commercial. We have very little here in Palos Verdes. And I think part of it with these type of stifling things that were to go into place would prevent them from wanting to come here as well. That then puts the burden of public works and tax dollars on other means besides these commercial businesses. We're going to have to carry a heavier load to pay for those public works in the future. So very concerned about that. Those residents, these 15 residents, I appreciate being able to have this chance to speak, but this whole thing is just ridiculous to me that we're even having this conversation. The La Venta has been there for that long. It's a wonderful place. That I live a minute from it by driving, and I think we just leave them well enough alone to do what they're doing and allow other businesses to come here and feel welcome to bring their businesses to Palos Verdes Estates. This is ridiculous.
All right, thank you, John. I appreciate that. Next is Duncan Blount.
Thank you, council members. My name is Duncan Blunt, and I'm the manager at La Venta. When Rob Eskridge wrote to the city about his family's time running events at La Venta, he was brutally honest in that letter about La Venta's business model. Your proposed restrictions fly in the face of the Eskridge family's warnings, and I would like to illustrate now just how untenable these restrictions would be. I've gotten permission to share a bit about our 2022 revenue. I calculated the percentage of our 2022 income which came directly from events which necessitated outdoor seating. Events with guest counts needing the use of our outdoor seating spaces accounted for 30.5% of our total 2022 revenue. 30.5%. And make no mistake, prospective clients with a 200-person guest count will not reduce their guest count for us. They will choose a different venue. Early on, we made compromises that our business could afford, and those compromises have already cost us dearly. In our policies, we have dropped our max guest count from 250 to 200. We have dropped the end time for music from 11 p.m. to 10 p.m., and we have hired additional staff to oversee vendor contracts and to ensure doors stay closed. I am a part of every sale, every event, and every day at La Venta, and I know these restrictions would wreak havoc on our bookings. Please preserve our business by revising the terms currently under consideration. Thank you both for your hard work.
Thank you, Duncan. Appreciate that. And next is Robert Gracier.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Just a suggestion, if you might consider enabling the video, at least for the speaker, it might make this a little more interactive if you're able. So I'll focus my remarks in three areas: high-level concerns about the music, and then about the noise monitoring. So I've reflected upon the proposed capacity, scheduling, and operating restrictions, and it strikes me that they compound with each other and would lead to a double-digit drop in revenue, all taken together. La Venta needs to continue to operate with a capacity of 225 guests for seated dining, including 60 outside on the veranda and the patio. They need to be able to schedule events up to capacity on multiple consecutive days based on market demand. Outdoor dining, in this, our outdoor activities in the summer months, should go to 9, when it's dark at night, 8:30. And then inside of that, manage the noise level appropriately. We know from Rob Eskridge's letter of September 13th, 2022, that this is possible. I'll speak on the music because that's an area that I'm qualified in. I'm a music director at United Methodist Church, and I played piano and organ for many ceremonies. The biggest miss musically is the lack of provision for amplified electric piano or keyboard outdoors. Those are by far the most popular instruments for playing a ceremony, and those instruments do not work unless they are amplified. So that's just a must-have. Noise monitoring. I'd like to see the focus be on proactive prevention and not punishment. In Rob's letter, he details how he managed situations, including oversaturated guests, gratuitous drum solos, and so on. La Venta should have the tools they need to manage noise levels. And I'll just pull some numbers out of thin air to illustrate the point. So PVA noise code for residential areas, it's split. There's a daytime standard and a nighttime standard. I think that's a good model. So let's say that the standard.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Appreciate your comments. And I'll just say this for the benefit of anyone who's getting cut off, please feel free to send us written correspondence with your or reach out to us directly. We're happy to meet with anyone who has more to say. Next up, I have Stephen Goldsmith. Oh, hold on. There you go.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, first I wanted to assure some of the speakers who made the reference of 15. I believe there's over 50 people involved in the efforts to deal with this in a way that reduces the impact on the nearest neighbors and still allows them to operate as a business. They're stated they're part of the community, it's et cetera, et cetera. So I think like a publicly traded stock company has to reveal its statistics so that investors have confidence. I think the community deserves the same. So perhaps the ad hoc can ask the caterer, et cetera, that what's the total revenue for last year? Let's have an experiment here. What was the net income from that? What's the maximum number of people that attended? What's the minimum? And what was the median? I think also the enforcement section leaves it a little squishy in terms of who decides if it's an offense or not. Are the police that arrive become the judges? That still puts it in the hands of the neighbors to complain. And there doesn't seem to be an end thing that they can just keep pricing this in and not get their license pulled. So I think there should be that ultimate draconian thing. But again, I certainly support the idea of a continued venue there. We just have to make it reasonable. It's I don't think Mr. Tang would be happy if a 7-Eleven opened next door to him. You know, if his neighbor decided to build a 7-Eleven. You know.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goldsmith. I'll just address your question quickly about enforcement. We've had some conversations with both the police department and with the code enforcement officer about the enforcement options and what I think Dawn and I think that the appropriate place for this to be enforced is with the code enforcement officer. These would be civil fines that are being issued. This is a part of the zoning text that is potentially proposed here. This code enforcement officer is the one who is responsible for enforcing that. And part of, I think the intention here is that we want neighbors to understand and have the expectation that although the police can respond to observe what is going on, it isn't really, we don't want to put them in a position where they're being asked to break up a party or something like that. It's also important to understand that the operator and the owners, to the extent that there would be some enforcement action taken against them, have a right to due process. So there's no busting down of walls and things like that. When there's a violation, they would have to go to the code enforcement officer, who would have to consider all the evidence that she had and make a decision about using her prosecutorial discretion to make a decision about whether or not to issue a warning or citation. Dawn, anything?
Yeah, I want to add to that. In addition, I would say it's really a partnership between the neighbors, the police department, and code enforcement, that if indeed there is a problem and a neighbor calls, the police can go to, if let's say there's excessive noise, the police can go to La Venta and talk to them and get them to turn the sound down. But what the vision here is that the police in some ways serve as a partner and a conduit, and they collect the information. They act on what needs to be acted on, but then they convey that information to the code enforcement officer, who ultimately is responsible for enforcing our codes and tracking violations.
All right, next we have Sandra Damian.
Hi, my name is Sandra Damiani. I've lived at 812 Via Del Monte since 2014, and before that in RPV since 1999. I'm concerned that this issue about La Venta can become a liability for the city because the proposed ordinance to allow La Venta to be a CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act exemption, may not be legal. La Venta has been operating beyond its scope by operating as a restaurant in a zone residential area and causing noise disturbances. It has had an expansion of use by not being regulated and currently potentially operating 365 days per year, 24/7. The parties were much smaller there in past years. I'm appreciative of the ad hoc's efforts to draft guidelines for La Venta's operations. I've reviewed letters from the community, many of which are a form letter using catchphrases such as cherished landmark and preserving La Venta Inn. I'm not against these nostalgic sentiments, and I'm not in support of tearing down La Venta, but that is not the issue. Some of those letters came from people who are not residents of PVE and therefore not taxpayers to the city, who will not have to bear the liability of this venue's current operations. I pay high taxes here and want my city council to advocate for me and not for a commercial operation. La Venta is a commercial operation in a residential area and only concerned about their bottom line. If I can't afford taxes here, I would have to move away. Likewise, if La Venta can't afford to operate under specific guidelines, its owners might need to sell as well. Yet, I'm sure they are making profits from wedding receptions, but they don't divulge their profits, so I don't know what their break even is. Generally, I agree with most of the ad hoc committee's guidelines, especially considering the noise, 52 decibels, and restricted parking along Via Del Monte. I do not agree with the excessive frequency of 361 days per year. I suggest perhaps 4 per week or no more than 200 per year. We do need restrictions and guidelines, just like similar venues, a neighborhood church and Catalina View Gardens, for example. Neighborhood church only has Saturday weddings, according to their website, and Catalina View.
Thank you, Sandra. Dawn, did you anything there you wanted to respond to?
No, thank you.
Okay. Sandra, thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate that. Next, we have Jason Buck.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Buck. I am a lifelong resident of Palos Verdes, and I work just down the street in Malaga Cove at REMAX. I also teach a class about the Palos Verdes history, and I'd like to point out that the architect for La Venta Inn was Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. His father designed the White House and also Manhattan Park in New York. Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. was here for 7 years as they developed their own California architecture. The Spanish, it was Vanderlip's dream to have the Amalfi Coast here in Palos Verdes. I feel that this is an iconic symbol, and if it's gone, it's really going to start to deteriorate the uniqueness of Palos Verdes. We have properties throughout Palos Verdes that are like La Venta with the Spanish, with the red tile roofs and things of that nature. I think that this helps our value, it helps our community, and it sustains value for other properties. If we diminish that or take it away, who's to say that other properties will then also be diminished and we'll lose some of our culture and our fanfare? I am very strongly in agreement with La Venta operating and being able to do what they need to do to stay alive. And it would be very difficult to not have that facility there as a landmark icon of our, it's the logo for the homeowners association. I mean, you're going to have to change all sorts of stuff if we get rid of this place. And I understand that it's complicated and I'd like to find the resolution, but I'd really like to get a little bit more behind La Venta's purpose in this environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Next up, we have KL.
Hello, this is Karen Logan, and I appreciate you having this forum and the work that you've done in trying to work with everybody on this. I concur with the comments provided earlier by Virginia Butler and John Tang. They also embody my sentiments. My concern is that after listening to multiple meetings, it seems like the residents of the area who want to put restrictions on La Venta are really asking them to, they're wanting to control their business. And it feels like some of the numbers and the restrictions and constraints are really going to be quite limiting to the success, and that there will be a second order of consequences, which have already been brought up by speakers here. As I've listened to the multiple meetings, I still am not clear about, how La Venta is zoned differently than any of the other concessions or similar types of items. Number two, I don't really understand this change in business from when New York Foods was there and now Meg's Enterprise. And three, I know there was an issue that Meg had intended to pay sales tax, but there was some kind of a technical issue. But I'm, kind of wondering what that revenue would be, because I think it would help the residents to understand what kind of a give back that would be to our city once that gets fixed. And finally, I was wondering if there were any research had been done on noise suppression solutions to introduce some technology that would help the parties that are looking for something to be quiet, and maybe they could be installed on the La Venta property and help. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Let me address a couple of your questions. You asked first about the zoning of La Venta. La Venta today currently operates under an ordinance that was passed in 1948, which authorizes its use for the purpose of a restaurant or as a hotel. And its use as an event venue is ancillary to that authorization. A hotel typically hosts events like weddings. The actual language of that it's very short. It's like 13 words, the entire thing, and it's fairly vague. But anyway, that's sort of the distinction that La Venta has at this time. As far as New York Foods, just sort of the history here, I roughly understand that the property was operated by a family in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then at some point in the late 80s, early 90s, New York Food took over the operations of it until COVID hit. And New York Foods was a caterer that had operations elsewhere in the South Bay, including a similar kind of facility in Manhattan Beach. But during COVID, their business obviously dried up pretty substantially, and they ended up going bankrupt. And that's the reason why the owners ultimately looked for a new tenant, and they found Miss Meg Walker, who happens to be a resident of the city also. So that's the history on that. On the sales tax issue, Dawn, maybe I'll defer to you. You might have some of the details there.
Yes, that's actually something that I'm working through with the city manager and our city support services director. My understanding from Meg is the city has to be identified as a certain thing for her to be able to actually identify us as a source. So we are trying to work through that. I don't know what type of or what amount of revenue would be available from that, but it is something that we're still actively working on. And then the other thing that you brought up, Karen, regarding noise suppression technology, I don't know. And I know I see Megan and Mark both have their hands raised. I don't know what kind of research they've done on anything like this. I know Catalina View Gardens has these panels that they put up, but my understanding is they're pretty pricey. And so, I don't know what has been looked at from a facility standpoint.
Yeah, I'll just add, I am not an expert on noise suppression, but I think there's basically two kinds. There's passive sort of noise suppression, which is essentially barriers, and they manufacture specific panels that try to absorb sound without bouncing it around any further. And then there's active noise cancellation, which I think might be what you're thinking about. But my understanding of active noise cancellation technology is it's not really appropriate for outdoors. It's not very effective in that for that purpose. But probably an area we should be looking at. Anything else, Dawn?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you. Joel Damiani.
Good evening, and thank you, council members, for all of your efforts. As a resident that lives within 300 feet of the facility, I have firsthand knowledge of the nonstop noise and disruption La Venta events have had over the years. Most of the respondents that sent in a copy of the Matthews drafted form letter are from individuals and families that do not live close to La Venta and present a case La Venta should operate freely to survive based on profitability and some nostalgic reasons. What they fail to understand is La Venta is zoned residential and needs to manage their business within the confines of a residential area. For years, they have breached established law with city council turning a blind eye. This again was for nostalgic reasons. This must change. Why does the neighborhood church and Catalina View Gardens have restrictions on number of events, number of attendees, and timing of events during the day when the Venta insists they are immune from such restrictions? The owners of 605 Paseo del Mar wanted to hold events at their premise, and yet the city went overboard in shutting them down. La Venta should operate within a set of similar restrictions. It's not our concern that they're profitable, but that they function properly within our peaceful community. Catalina View Gardens is limited to 30 events per year. Why can't La Venta also have similar limitations versus the proposed expansion of their ability to almost every day of the year with no monitoring of noise prior to 8:30 at night? A party of 200 will certainly be loud regardless of the time of day or night. To reduce noise and the impact the events have on the surrounding community, further restrictions on size must be mandated. Why is the city proposing La Venta have outdoor activities? If the goal is to affirm how business was done historically and not expand their operations, no such activities should be allowed. I applaud the parking limitations on Via Samonte and think it should be expanded to other streets. Enforcement is critical in containing La Venta and should include restrictions on holding events for 1 month, 3 months, and possibly longer for fourth consecutive offenses. It's not the city's business.
Thank you, Joel. Really appreciate your comments. Dawn, was there anything you want to respond to there?
No, I just want to encourage him, clearly, anyone who's been cut off to please send they're probably prepared comments, to please make sure you send them to laventacomments@pvestates.org.
Yeah, thank you. Next is Brian Pressman, which I'm going to ask to unmute. So you'll have to unmute yourself.
Done. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So my name's Brian Pressman. I live on Via Del Monte, about 7/10 of a mile up the street from the La Venta Inn. Just in response to some of the other speakers, I submitted a written comment that I wrote myself. It's not a form letter. I live in the city, and like I said, I'm on the street that La Venta Inn is here. I've heard numerous people over the course of the last couple of years, like they love to say how we need to preserve Palos Verdes estates. And when you say that, that doesn't necessarily just mean trees and scenery. It also means things like La Venta Inn. It's been here since the city was established. And while I'm sympathetic to folks who live closer to La Venta Inn than I do, it was here long before their houses were here. And I also am very cautious and suspect of the city actually micromanaging private enterprise. That's something that I don't think is an American value and something I don't think the city should be doing. My question to you, Jim, is I've noticed people keep on citing a zoning law. I'm curious about the history of zoning, because I did a little research and I thought like the first zoning law came from New York City in about 1918, which is not that far away from when the construction, I'm guessing, of Palos Verdes Estates and La Venta Inn started. So I'm curious, does La Venta Inn actually predate the zoning laws that people here keep on citing? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that. I'll try to address your question as best I can. The city was incorporated in 1939, and I think La Venta was probably built in 1923. So La Venta definitely predates all of our zoning, because we had no zoning prior to the incorporation of the city, 16 years later. The zoning text that I mentioned previously, the 13 words that authorized the current use, was passed in 1948, and that is essentially the only thing that governs La Venta's operations, is that authorization. And I'll just there was another speaker that was drawing comparisons to the neighborhood church, which people are familiar with, is in Lower Malaga Cove, and with Catalina View Gardens, which is actually in Rancho Palos Verdes. Both of those operate under what is called a conditional use permit. Different process, not specific zoning, but a conditional use that's issued to them. And the histories on both of those properties is different. Both of them were authorized for that purpose long after they were built in more recent times. So Catalina View Gardens, I think, was authorized for that use around sometime in the 90s. Is that right, Don? Early 90s,
I
late
think
80s?
so.
And
I'd have to go back and look at the CUP.
yeah, and I think that the neighborhood church, which I think looks every bit like a church, it was built originally as a private residence. I think the CUP there was issued in the late 80s. Different process, but I will say this: just if you look at those CUPs, both for the neighborhood church and for Catalina View Gardens, you're going to see language that is not dissimilar from the list of terms that we have in terms of the specificity of it. And it's actually in land use zoning, it's not uncommon for this level of detail to be present in the authorization for use. Anything you'd add, Dawn?
No, I think you bring up a good point about original intent of the building versus later usage, which is why the CUPs came into being. I mean, there are facilities or other event venues throughout Southern California that might have started as a house and then became a venue. But to your point, it's not uncommon to have a list of regulations in order to try and create a balance between business operation and the residential neighborhood that they exist in.
Yeah, and I'll just I'll add just an example. It's not limited to just issues like just event venues. It's typical of any business that's going to have impacts on neighbors. So, for example, the stables might operate under a CUP, and the kinds of impacts that it might have on neighbors include things like noise and dust and odor and traffic and parking and all those kinds of things. And it's not unusual for in land use planning for you to try to specify specific ways in which those impacts will be mitigated to the neighbors.
I think the one other thing I would add is I think we've learned and this is across different issues that current and previous councils have dealt with, is that it's not unusual that our city codes are light in terms of details and specifics relative to what we've seen in some other cities. And I think there just tends to be an evolution that as things come up, cities revisit their codes, they update them similar to how we update some of our policies.
All right, with that, I've got Tamsin Kurtz.
Thanks. Yes, name's Tamsin Curtis. I bought the house that supposedly Cary Grant lived in. Of course, he filmed at La Venta Inn. I've been here for nearly 4 years. And I've taken the time to join tonight because I am dismayed at what I see going on next door with the constant arguments over this topic. I am frustrated at the signs that I see posted around our city in contravention to what I believe. We're not meant to have little signs all over the show, keep quiet PVE. I've met many people along the way, who've actually had events or gotten married at La Venta Inn. It appears to me that it's a very, very symbolic and special place. And so it's unsettling that this is happening. I am also here to remind everyone that this isn't a retirement community, though I feel like people think it is. I also am of the understanding that our city is either bankrupt or near to it. And so, as one of the younger residents, what are we doing to push progress and generate revenue? And no, that doesn't mean we want 7-Elevens opening up in our community. Of course not. But I found this lovely book at the Malaga Ranch Market, and I thought I'd just read from it because I don't understand, why people don't know this background. But I'm going to read from it. Given the name La Venta, meaning the sale, it was originally built by the managers of the Palos Verdes project as a clubhouse for the entertainment of prospective land developers and home buyers. But it became the social center for Palos Verdes, hosting many weddings and dinner outings. The first large La Venta party was held in 1924 on the 3-acre site, with 200 realtors who wined and dined in the beautiful setting. And then another
Thank you, Tamsin, for your comment. We really appreciate that. I just want to respond to one piece about the city's finances. I would probably take issue with the characterization of the city being at risk of bankruptcy. I don't think that that's a realistic probability. I think the city does have revenue challenges, and as it happens, Dawn and I are actually on another ad hoc together working on specifically that, looking at both tax and non-tax related revenue options, because right now we operate substantial portion of our revenue is a fixed parcel tax that does not have any inflation adjuster in it, and that is making budgeting challenging for us. But I also, I think it's important also to understand at least the revenue options with respect to La Venta that we've considered so far, they're fairly de minimis in terms of the city's finances. So, Dawn, is there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought, you commented on that, because I would agree with you that I wouldn't characterize the city's finances are near bankruptcy. We do have challenges. We do have pension debt that, we're somewhat at the, I don't want to say the whims of CalPERS, but definitely beholden to how they perform and decisions that they make. But, since Prop 13 was passed back in the mid 1980s, the city has historically relied on a parcel tax to cover about 25% of our revenue base. And when that's something that is cyclical and has to be approved every periodic time, depending on the term of the parcel tax, it does put the city, in a tough position. But, Jim and I are committed to working with residents and other council members to find revenue options with an early focus right now on non-tax revenue. As soon as we find some additional bandwidth beyond the current workload that we have right now.
Okay, thank you. Michael Lemus.
Hello, everyone. Michael Lemus here. I am an owner and resident in Lunada Bay and a 15-year former employee with New York Food Company. In my capacity with that company, I was a sales event coordinator, chef, server, bartender, and also a groom at La Venta Inn. So I've worked probably in my capacity over 100 events or more at La Venta Inn over a 15-year period. As a director of corporate development for New York Food Company, I represented New York Food Company in the area and always had the honor of introducing people, area corporations, businesses to New York Food Company as a whole. And La Venta Inn was always very well appreciated, and people far and away always knew of it. The one thing I'd like to remind everybody is that there's a reason that New York Food Company unfortunately left the La Venta Inn after such a great run, and also running a very successful other business. I'd like people to keep in mind that New York Food Company had a complete corporate catering division that had approximately 65 to 70 orders going out every single day, Monday through Friday, that were delivered into area businesses and set up buffet style. In my capacity with New York Food Company, I was always reminded that this was what covered the overhead. Our corporate catering division that was 365, 24/7, every single day was what covered New York Food Company's overhead. The venues and everything else were icing on the cake. It is a very difficult take on a venue and cater from an offsite location. New York Food Company operated out of a 15,000 square foot commissary in El Segundo. And with all due respect, I'm not sure what capacity.
Okay. Thank you for that, Michael. Appreciate it. And next I have just Kristen, no last name.
Hi there, esteemed city council members. My name is Kristen and I was born and raised here. And then after college, I boomeranged back and have lived in our home in Palos Verdes Estates for 20 years. We were drawn back here by the absolutely lovely, warm welcome from our neighbors and the kindness that has been shown our whole family, our children, even my parents and siblings over many decades. It's quite possibly the most inviting and most storybook place to live. We greatly appreciate the work that every city council and committee member and staff does to keep our lovely city not only operational, but thriving and a true beacon on the hill. We have all been attracted to this little corner of the world for its charm, open spaces, pastoral nature, largely uncongested streets, family-friendly, great schools, green rolling hills, and friendly, welcoming, philanthropically minded people. It has its own police and fire department. It's absolutely Mayberry. It has a rich history going back 100 years, and it's why so many people love calling PV home. We've all been in front of the city council from time to time to put a home project before you all, to get a permit for a time-honored block party, or to follow the rules on tree trimming to preserve indigenous plantings and what is best for all. Occasionally, we answer the call of duty ourselves to serve on a committee to help give back, whether it's for traffic safety, the police department, planning commission, parklands, helping the schools, all of it. We follow the rules of the art jury, neighborhood compatibility, and city charter. We don't always love the rules, and sometimes we encounter a stuck-up sticky beak in the process, but realize it's what made this town distinct and full of the beauty and character and worth preserving. It's in your new homeowner paperwork. The rules of the art jury, neighborhood compatibility, and city charter do not come as a surprise. It's all there. It doesn't make sense to a great many people here why we would have to.
Okay. Thank you for that, Kristen. Next, I have Meg Walker.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and our ad hoc committee and city staff. It's perfect time for my children to start screaming. Okay, my name is Meg Walker. I'm the operator of La Venta Inn. The city of Palos Verdes Estates started this conversation between La Venta Inn and a small group of neighbors in late 2021. And since that time, we have been scheduled for and prepared information, support, and counsel for 8 planning commission meetings and 5 city council meetings. We were actually heard at 9 of those meetings due to postponements. Throughout this process, we have asked La Venta neighbors and supporters to advocate for business to continue at La Venta. And I'm so proud to share that La Venta has received over 300 official support letters on record with the city. There have been a few negative letters, and those account for approximately 11 to 15 households near La Venta. So these households versus 300 plus neighbors who have voiced their support for continued operations at La Venta. And in these 15 months of hearings, we've connected with and worked with now 3 city attorneys, 3 city managers going on 4, and 3 police chiefs. And this isn't a criticism, it's just a note to show how much has changed and moved throughout this process. And here are some numbers to share about our business in light of the proposed ZTA. The ad hoc proposal seeks to limit guest count to 135. 35% of our leads in 2022 are for guest counts over 135. That accounts for more than 750 leads that would not even bother reaching out for a quote. They would just scroll to the next venue. The second thing is the ad hoc proposal seeks to limit outdoor dining to 24 guests total. And if this was in effect in 2022, as Duncan mentioned, this would have cut our revenue by 30.4%. And any business owner on this call would have to consider closing if the government restriction took away 30% of their business overnight. This has been an expensive, stressful, and extremely time-consuming process for La Venta and for the city. We are so ready and willing to move forward in a productive manner and operate as a good neighbor to those closest to us and continue to serve this community in our 100th year in operation. Thank you to this committee and city council for their consideration.
Thank you, Meg. Appreciate that. Dawn, is there anything there you wanted to respond to?
No.
Okay. Next, we have Mark Matthews.
Hi. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I wanted to address a letter that Councilwoman Murdoch has been cutting and pasting and sending out to people who have written to her and to you, Jim, about La Venta. In those letters, she's been saying that the fire marshal won't permit any more than 24 people on our veranda. It's just not accurate. I hope you've received the documentation that we have sent to you to show that. She also said that she finds this process very difficult because The owners of La Venta haven't been negotiating. I think her letter asserted that it would be, she'd like to respond because we've been unwilling to collaborate and instead have hired a marketing firm. We've been collaborating for 18 months. We've agreed to cut the fire marshal's maximum allowed indoor guest count by 1/3. We have shortened the hours of operation from 11 to 10. We've banned seating, outdoor dining in the courtyard. We agreed to no amplified sound outdoors, except for 1 hour during ceremonies. We have ceased outdoor dining and drink service by 8:30 and then closed the doors to keep noise from escaping into the neighborhood. We've used no other event purpose in the parking lot other than parking cars. We agreed to that. We now patrol the parking lot and the grounds with decibel meters to ensure that guests are keeping noise to a reasonable minimum. We've put up signage asking our guests to respect the neighbors. We've put limits on staff parking to directly in front of La Venta. We've banned shuttle buses that beep when they back up. We've agreed that shuttles cannot idle in the parking lot or next to neighbors' houses. We have agreed to set up sound monitoring equipment if that's the way you want to go. This is by no means a full list. Twice we thought we would come to an agreement with.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Don, is there anything there you wanted to respond to? Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to respond to, and I appreciate Mark's comments, and yes, La Venta and Megan Mark have done a number of things to really try and create an environment that's good for the neighbors, and we absolutely appreciate that. And part of this has been about, successors and who comes after that. The main thing I wanted to comment though on was the veranda, and we have 2 documents that we've received. We've worked with our community development director to work through the fire department to understand what the fire code capacities or occupancies are that have been approved. And, we're working off of the numbers that have been shared with us.
I'll just add, Mark, we did receive your correspondence on that issue. Dawn and I, in fact, discussed it this afternoon. So you can expect us to take that under advisement. All right, next up I have Mark.
Hi, this is Mark Zimmett. One of the naysayers said, one of the La Venta naysayers said Ting wouldn't want a 7-Eleven built next to him. Well, I'm quite certain that La Venta wouldn't have wanted Mr. Goldsmith next to him if they knew they were going to complain, and La Venta was there first. We live 50 yards from Palos Verdes High School. I couldn't imagine if I attempted to restrict the noise emanating from the high school by saying, hey, look, I moved here a few years ago, and that's kind of irritating noise. 50, out of my calculation, 5 people tonight that are affected by La Venta's operations spoke. The remainder, by my calculation, is over 25 so far that are in support of La Venta. You are our elected representatives. Represent us. Ironically, the same cadre of residents who oppose people enjoying themselves at La Venta are by and large the same group that don't want any change to Palos Verdes, including any business development. You are our elected representatives. You have heard from the mass. Now I see Jim Parker coming up in a couple, and I've already gotten into spats with him about it. So I see that, make that 6 that are complaining. But beyond that, the vast majority of us properly thinking people about how La Venta affects and impacts our city want La Venta to stay. These impositions that somehow the council thinks might be a way to limit its noise are ridiculous, and none of y'all are business owners of La Venta, so you really don't have an idea of how impactful and debilitating that would be to a business that's been here for over 100 years. Please don't do anything to make it close.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Next, I have Julie Kassoff.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hi. Thank you guys for listening to us. And yes, I am, a close neighbor to La Venta. I definitely want them to succeed, but I also just want to make sure that the neighbors in close proximity are protected. I think that what you guys put forth, thank you very much for that. I'm sure there's some changes that may need to be made, but in general, I think that we're moving in the right direction. One thing that I really liked in the proposal was kind of coming back to it. I think it's like 6 months and then afterwards every year. I thought that was great because then the neighbors, can see if it's working. And also I think that La Venta will also need to see if it's working. So I do really like that because I think that we're figuring it out. But I think that it's important and it's great that we have some way to come back and make sure that it's working for both parties. Or not both parties, but everyone involved, or at least it's not awful for everybody. One thing I wanted to ask about how that process would work. Like, I want to make sure it's not just sort of like an administrative check the box kind of thing. Like, will residents actually, speak to, I think it's like some director of something or another. Like, I just want to see how that will play out.
Dawn, did you have any comments on that point?
Sure. And I think part of this is something that we would need to work with the community development director on. But the vision was that the community development director would do some kind of public outreach, both with the operator and owner of La Venta, and then send out notification of wanting to collect information from, neighbors or, just the public in general, and would factor that into a report that then would go out to the Planning Commission to be reviewed in a public setting. So that was some of our initial cut at how that would look. Obviously, the details would need to be fleshed out.
Okay. All right, next up, Jim Parker.
I have lived here through 3 operators of the Venta operation. Our own homeowners pay for the bulk of the infrastructure, not La Venta. Laws should be followed when they're made. The city guidelines, rules should be followed. It doesn't seem that they are. La Venta's not going anywhere if you curb it down to being a small operation. We don't want to see La Venta go away. $55,000, take that as an average, times 149 events is $8,195,000. They can do it 361 days per year and go up to 400 to 500 events. Tone it down to 5 million, that's 55,000 average, just 100 events. That should be easy to do. If they can't make money that way, well, they need help. Just because the building was here before us does not give them the right to do whatever they please and be disruptive. Please remember the short-term wedding ban and the neighborhood church. It's already been mentioned. This is not a vote by attendance of this Zoom meeting. Mark has done a great job of going out to Facebook and getting email lists from high schools, people that don't even live in the impact zone. The 1948 code is not vague at all. Just look up the word inside, look up existing and building, and only. That's not vague. There's no way, no matter how much you say it, that you can say that those 7 words are vague. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So I'd like to just address that last statement. I don't have the code in front of me, but Mr. Parker is correct. It essentially says that its use is authorized within the existing building only. And I think that there has been some question about the meaning of that. I'll share my perspective on it, and I've said this to residents in the past. The idea that I believe that language, and I think I believe that language is intended to preserve the building and preclude its being redeveloped and then also used as a larger hotel or as a larger restaurant. I think that that's supported by some of the historical record we have on it, both on news articles at the time and I think just common sense, because there's no such thing as a hotel that operates only indoors. Customers need to arrive, they need to park, they need to walk to the front door. Hotels have facilities outside. So to me, that part of it is unclear. What I meant when I said it was vague is I meant that it doesn't impose a lot of restrictions. It authorizes a specific use it authorizes a couple of uses without imposing any limits or restrictions on it. Don, is there anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have Jackie Clark.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak, and thank you for this meeting. I have been a neighbor of La Venta for 29 years. I live on Paseo del Sol, approximately half a mile, but if you were to make a direct line from La Venta to my house, it's actually less than that without all the curving of the streets. In all the time that I've lived here, I have never experienced a problem with noise from La Venta. I have never experienced a problem with driving around the curve where the parking is. And I have been past La Venta when there's been events time and time again. And I think it's been very well maintained. I actually have more noise that I hear coming from the beach life concerts in Redondo Beach than I do from La Venta. I also think if you were to close down La Venta, which is a very likely possibility with all these restrictions, you could end up with someone building a mansion or several more. And I will tell you that from my own experience of having that happen in my own neighborhood on my street, that those homes also have big parties and they make a lot of noise. And quite frankly, all I've done is close my windows and I've been fine. And I really think that there's an overreach happening here by some of these neighbors that have moved in after knowing that the La Venta existed and was a venue for these large parties. And I'm very much in favor of trying to support La Venta. I just really think there's an overreach right now with all of these extra restrictions. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Kathy Lundy.
Well, I'm not Kathy Lundy. She had to go sing at choir tonight. So this is Albro Lundy, and I have she just asked me to take her positions, and I'm new to this as far as the disputes are concerned. I can see La Venta from my front door and from my side windows, and we live definitely within the zone where you can hear the parties there, but it doesn't bother us. As a matter of fact, it's kind of nice. You think, oh, there's another wedding going on. There's another nuptials happening. We hear the music and it's not late at night. It doesn't keep us up. And so just from that perspective, we don't have a problem. I had a couple questions. And so, by the way, we are in favor of La Venta continuing to be La Venta and operating as a designated site as a hotel or a restaurant. Has the La Venta Inn been designated a historical building? That's one question I have. Two, I've heard both sides now. It said it's zoned residential. Well, no, it's zoned as a hotel or a restaurant. And I think people need to understand what it is zoned as and what they're entitled to do. And then third, I've done land use. And by the way, thank you very much, the city council members and people that are doing it. It's a thankless job and one that I wouldn't want to have. And I've been asked to try and do it, and I've just denied them right off the top. So I really appreciate what you're doing and how you're doing it. But has there been, because these restrictions that you're proposing seem fairly onerous to me. And I don't think they're going to be beneficial in terms of continuing the operation. So has there been a legal analysis as well as to those restrictions in terms of maybe making it a taking by the government, and whether that would be a taking? And secondarily, if they put it in, from a land use perspective, first off, that would be the city buying a lawsuit. I don't want to see that happen.
Thank you, Kathy, or excuse me, Mr. Lundy. Thank you. I'll answer I'll try to answer some of your questions. It is not a historic site that I'm aware of. The zoning question is kind of a complicated one, and I don't know that Dawn or I have an answer to how it is zoned. I will tell you that it has been asserted by quite a few people that it is zoned R1. It obviously was not originally built as a residence, but it was also built at a time before. I don't know what land use rules would have been relevant to the property at that time. It was unincorporated at the time it was built. The city was. The county has it listed as in their records as a commercial site. In any event, there is a specific carve out in the city's code that authorizes its use for purpose other than as a residence. So that much we do know. In terms of the legal analysis, I will say, neither Dawn or I are attorneys, and you heard me earlier give a kind of legal opinion, but I do want to, the city is represented by an attorney, and Dawn and I have access to him, and he gives us his opinion on these things. Whether it would be a taking, not a question that I'm in a position to answer, except that our city attorney hasn't advised that anything that we're doing here would constitute a taking. And I'll just say that in general, land use decisions like these are not, they're considered part of municipalities' police power, and usually are not found to be a taking. But again, not an attorney. Dawn, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add that my understanding from our city attorney is that it is officially zoned R1, but there is, if you go into our municipal code in the zoning section, there's a specific area that says exceptions, and that's where the code that Jim referenced earlier is. And I think the other point that I would just add is, I'm with you, Mr. Lundy. I am not interested in a lawsuit, and leave it at that.
Okay. Next up, we have MLS.
Thanks very much. My name is Monique Sugimoto. I'm a resident of Lunada Bay, and I'm also the archivist and the local history librarian with the Palos Verdes Library District. First to Mr. Lundy's question, the site is actually listed as a historic site from the Palos Verdes Historical Society. So in that sense, it is a historical site. The comments, I have a couple of comments tonight. One is that just in terms of the calculus and how the decision-making to restrict La Venta is calculated, there has been a lot of talk tonight about La Venta Inn and its historical value. And I'd like to point out that it is really the quintessential representation of the Palos Verdes Estates, in terms of architecture, open space, and views. And it was really what the Palos Verdes project, that is pre-city incorporation, was all about. It was over the years that it has garnered pride, interest, and devotion, and this historical kind of feeling towards it. And I think that should factor equally as the decibels and the days of events and the times that events. And so I think that should factor into the equation, or to the calculus of whatever ordinance that we come about. We haven't really spoken to the language of the ordinance. This is something that I'd like to think that we could do. La Venta Inn has operated prior to the incorporation of the city. And I think that a lot of people have expressed the opinion, and I am of the opinion, that we would like to see La Venta operate continuously as an event venue. So I'd like to see, and also ask, if the language related to its operation can be added into the ordinance. Also, the one other point that I'd like to make, and I think that this is important in terms of the the historical record. In 1948, prior to the city's incorporation, so the city actually recognized, I think, the value.
Thank you, Monique. Appreciate that. I just want to go back to Mr. Lundy's point. Monique, I appreciate what you were saying about the historic nature of the building. I think Mr. Lundy's question was about whether or not the building benefits from any legal protection as a historic site, and my understanding is the answer is no. Then in terms of your question about language authorizing the use, it might be good for, we can reach out to you and get a little more detail on what you mean by that, because I didn't quite follow. Dawn, did you?
I think it's good to reach out to her. I know the original ordinance that came to us from Planning Commission kept the existing language about a hotel and restaurant within the existing building only, and then it went on to talk about use around events, which is similar to some of the stuff that we were doing here with the terms, but I think we should talk to her to understand specifically what she's talking about.
Okay. Thank you. Next I have Steve O'Neill. Steve? Oh, there we go.
You hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Okay. Steve O'Neill, a longtime resident of Palos Verdes Estates. I want to say I am a member of the board of the Palos Verdes Homes Association, but what I'm going to say tonight is just as a homeowner. I grew up in Palos Verdes Estates in 1952. I've owned homes here for 40 some odd years. I live in Villa Samonte, which is very close to the La Venta Inn. I have no problem with La Venta Inn operating as a business. I had no problem with them operating as a business before. I caution the council to put too many restrictions on them that they can't do their business correctly. And I know the council is not in the business of deciding who can do business and who can't and why and where, but be very, very careful here, because if the business goes out of business and the owners decide to sell it, we have no idea what's going to happen to it afterwards. And I'll tell you one thing, that building is not going to stand there. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Next up, I have Blake.
Okay, great. Thanks for allowing me to speak. So I am a real estate attorney, and I've reviewed the zoning text amendment, the history, and the CUP process that other venues throughout the city are using to deal with similar situations. In my legal opinion is that the ZTA on its face is not a taking. It is legal, but the city is indeed buying a lawsuit by entertaining a ZTA. The issue which the city council seems to be ignoring is between keeping the existing zoning in place and regulating La Venta through the CUP process, or using the zoning text amendment to expand the use. And that's exactly what is happening by explicitly acknowledging special events uses as a permitted use. And bear in mind that currently that's not the case. Mayor Roos said that it's an ancillary use, but it's not specifically acknowledged as a permitted use. That expands the use that's presently allowed. If you then impose restrictions on that use, you are taking somebody's enjoyment of property, the ownership's enjoyment of property. So our hands would be tied to further restrict La Venta in the future beyond what we would be accomplishing through the ZTA, because doing so would invite a condemnation lawsuit. That is why the CUP process, which leaves restrictions up to the public every couple of years, is the solution for dealing with this issue. And that is what the public needs to demand. Keep it in place, put this before a public review every couple of years, allow people to chime in, and that is the way of dealing with restrictions going forward. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. I will just I'll just mention that No, there's as many legal opinions as there are attorneys, but our own city attorney, actually, this one and the one we had previously, both recommended the use of a ZTA specifically because, in their opinion, it was easier to change and that a CUP would be harder to revoke. So, for what it's worth, that's part of that analysis. But appreciate your comments there. All right, next I have Sally Seemack, who does not have audio, it doesn't look like. Okay, I'm gonna skip Sally and come back. Sally will need audio before we can unmute her. Next, I have Jack.
My name is Jack Wade, and I'm here with my wife, Ann. I want to know if you can hear me okay.
We can.
I'm here to support La Venta Inn and its current operations, prior operations. I think it's been nothing but an asset to the city. My comments will be a little different in the sense that I continue to be concerned with the corrosive nature of the self-absorbed nature of many of our neighbors. We have a terrific community. I think we ought to enjoy it for what it is. The fact that it may not have the most modern zoning, that's terrific. We don't have curbs on our streets and we don't have streetlights. All that stuff just part of the charm. So I really encourage, amplify some comments I made earlier and some written comments to the council, is that I think that, the comments were that the good news is that the real estate market is really healthy. And those people who are not happy with their current location near La Venta might consider selling and relocating somewhere where they don't have to deal with the problems they're so concerned with. And finally, in considering whether or not it's 15 families or 50 families, my calculation would suggest that's less than 1% of the 5,000 parcels in Palos Verdes Estates. Let's push these guys aside, get on with business. Let's spend the next meeting talking about how we can make La Venta successful, not how we can restrict it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. Sally still does not have audio, so I will move on to Douglas Bigley.
Hello there. This is Doug Bigley. I live at 805 Via Conejo, and I've spoken a couple times before, but basically I'm in La Venta's backyard. And I've certainly felt the effects of La Venta when it comes to noise and parking, and I have never used La Venta. And I'm not sure I'm ever likely to use La Venta, mainly just because I have no particular reason to do so. But I know a lot of people really enjoy La Venta. And even though I have to incur the costs, I support their continued business operation, because I think it's important for other people to be able to take advantage of such a great location. I want to point out, we did have an election, and this was an issue on the election. The opposing side was, I think, squarely aligned with the opposition to La Venta. And I know it may not even been the only issue, but it certainly was a major issue, and you're all still there. So I think people say, well, how do we know? And generally it's because elections come in between these issues. So that's one indication that maybe there's a lot more people pro La Venta. The other, and the last thing I have, and I guess it's partly a question, is that, it seems to me, because noise is such a significant part of the problem in parking, why hasn't noise been addressed? Why are we saying it's going to go, without us being able to get a consultant or anything, it's going to go before council for yet another round? I've had to use noise consultants in the past, and there's a lot more options. Everybody's admitted they don't have that expertise. So why wouldn't we get potential options on the table? So we've looked at all the potential options, so we can kind of back into a model that works for La Venta, assuming we want their business model to be successful with the limited number of restrictions that the city has to impose to get there. So why wouldn't we start there and kind of put our energies into kind of a solutions approach to keep their model viable?
So thank you, Douglas. Appreciate your comment. I think that you've made a very fair point there. Dawn, do you have any reaction?
No, I mean, that's part of what we've been kind of struggling with back and forth, and noise is noise and parking are probably the two biggest issues here. And, you know, we tried to come up with different ways of attacking the noise, but definitely a sound consultant is something that we need to consider.
I'm being told that Sally may be our phone number here, so I'm going to try and unmute the phone number. If you're not Sally CMAC and don't intend to speak, please let us know.
Are we there? John?
There you are. Did you intend to speak, sir?
Yes, yes. My name is John, Sally's husband.
Okay.
And just real quick, I've listened to everything everybody's been saying, and I just want to mention a few things just so my credibility. Number one, we got married at Venta Inn 45 years ago. Been living in Palos Verdes for over 30 plus years. It's a landmark. I noticed that when the new people went in there, they fixed it up. They really made the thing look sharp again because it was kind of falling apart after COVID. And again, as far as the use, real quick, the whole thing is a noise issue, it sounds like to me. That people, and you mentioned it had 5 acres. I'm sure there people built homes next to that thing, and then basically start complaining about the noise. We had the same issue in Laguna Seca, up north. It's a racetrack. People built homes on the ridge, start complaining about the noise. Laguna Seca worked with them to lower the noise of race cars, mind you, to acceptable level that people can then live up there and the racetrack could exist. I think you could probably do the same thing with La Venta Inn. The other thing, on most streets in Palos Verdes estates, the noise levels is between probably 58 to 60 just because of cars. So 52 is a pretty low noise level. And then I've worked with Toyota and other people about noise levels, and I do a lot of consulting. So I'm just saying the whole idea is get a noise level that makes sense, and then basically do things economically to keep that noise level in that area. And I think that there's been some compromise on both sides. I think you might want to reach an agreement now rather than keep escalating, asking for more and more. I think the council should find some place where there's a great level between both. And as far as it being historical and all that, and being a business, I'm going to let that go to other people because I'm not familiar with that. But I do like that landmark. We walk by it all the time, and to me, it's a pleasant looking building with that tower and everything, and also the events. They seem to always be in control. We don't see craziness happening, and the tenants are very nice when they park people. So we just want to maintain that landmark. Okay, and and I also believe also the revenue for the city. It's always.
Thank you for that comment. I want to just address one thing because I think a couple of folks have gotten confused about a statement that I made. My point is not that it's not a historical site. I think it's a very valuable and historic building and one worth preserving. The reason I addressed the question the way I did is because I want people to understand that there's no historical designation for it that would prevent it from being redeveloped. So to some extent, that lends credence to the idea that it is necessary for them to be able to we need to consider the possibility of redevelopment here as we consider what restrictions we might put in place on the property. So yes, historic, no, not protected. Okay, Joe DeSanto. Oh,
hi,
Don,
good evening.
Sorry, Joe. Don, did you have something you wanted to say? You're muted.
A couple people have brought up the point about it being about noise, and why don't we just hire a noise consultant? And I just wanted to provide a little bit of context that we've talked with noise consultants, right? La Venta hired a noise consultant, and we talked with him about his recommendations, and then some of the neighbors hired a noise consultant, and we talked with him about his recommendations. And this is a little part of our pause right now is it's a little bit like Jim's comment about there are just as many legal opinions as there are attorneys. And noise is a very complicated issue. It's not a kind of a straightforward thing like one would think. And so that's part of why, Jim and I need to stop and think about this, because we've already heard two very different opinions about what's the appropriate noise level for that area. And so, we've been trying to figure out whether a third noise person would just present a different opinion, and then a fourth would do another opinion. And so that's part of, what we've been trying to grapple with.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
No problem. Thanks for being here tonight and putting your time into this. I appreciate it. I want to address a couple of things that have been mentioned already. Some comments have talked about why'd you move into the area and so forth. I think it's important to understand that since 1946, up until the noise problem started in 1994, 90% of the homes were built in the city. And there is no evidence of noise problems up until about 1994. So those folks bought lots, built houses, and it was a quiet neighborhood generally. So that's important to know. SB 9 has been mentioned. La Venta is on the state registry of historic places. SB 9 excludes such properties from the provisions of that bill. I think that's important to understand. In 1994, 7 residents in the area went to the city council, communications from the public. Dr. Rich Liu, a prominent religious leader from Villa Del Monte, said he has lived in the area for 21 years and he now feels he is living next door to a bar because of the loud, raucous music. Mary Jane Martin, Villa Samonte, said she was concerned for the neighborhood because of the excessive noise from La Venta Inn. She said it is continual on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and remarked she has lived in the city for 23 years. She said there is a significant difference in the noise level coming from La Venta Inn in comparison to when the Eskridges were operating it. And my question is, did the committee review the draft terms for compliance with the general plan? And if so, what was the outcome? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. So let me just address a couple of things and then we'll get to your question. The SB 9 thing, that's interesting to hear. And I hadn't heard that before, obviously. I will say that I'll add, though, I don't think SB 9 is the only risk here. There's other avenues that by which it could actually be redeveloped quite a bit larger than what is authorized under SB 9. In terms of your question, I think that's an important one, not one that we have sat down and, or at least not, I haven't been involved in a conversation with the city attorney about its compliance with the general plan. That is likely a requirement in order for us to pass it. So it would have to go through that review in advance. Dawn, do you have any familiarity there?
No, I don't. I know we looked at it relative to code in our other ordinances, but not specifically with respect to the general plan.
I think that's an important point, though. Anything
Yes.
that we do here has to comply. Okay, next up, Denise Miyasato.
Hi, good evening, and thank you, Jim, Don, and those here. We live about, I don't know, a pitching wedge or a 9-iron away from La Venta. We've been living here since 2007, and we've actually haven't had any issues with La Venta and the events that they've had. Just concerned more now about the ask that is being proposed, but apart from that, do you want to?
So, yeah, let me chime in. So we bought the house in 2007. We did our due diligence. We checked how La Venta could operate. We also checked on what it would take to be able to say, what is our house zoned for, single resident or double resident or 2-story? So when we bought our house, it was a single story home. We put in went through the process of the planning commission, art jury, meeting with all our neighbors and going through exactly what we were proposing to do. We had to make some sacrifices. It came all out of our pocket, and we got through and we were able to build our house. This is the same type of thing in my mind. La Venta Inn is changing the game of when we bought the house. They want expanded days of operation, expanded hours of operation. They want noise. They want outdoor dining. They want more traffic, they want more parking, and it's not necessarily about a business decision. It's about what is viable for what they are currently operating. I have no issue with what they were doing from a viability within their current rules of engagement. but those rules of engagement are being asked to be changed. And that's where we're struggling. And Jim and Don, I commend you for trying to throw out a few things that are out here in hard writing now. 135 guests, 200. I just watched 3 people today drive up our street, which is a dead end, one end street, because it has a chain at 30 miles an hour. And then they turn around, they do the drive of shame. We've asked Mark, we've asked Meg, just put a stop sign down on.
Thank you to both of you for your comments. And next up, we have Mark.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Mark Fitzpatrick. I'm a 22-year resident of Palos Verdes Estates. And my wife and I got married at the La Venta Inn in 1977. So we go way back with the La Venta Inn. And as you would expect, we fully support its continued operation. While I applaud Jim and Dawn for your efforts to listen to everybody's opinion, I have a difficult time understanding why there should be any restrictions on the La Venta Inn different from where they were prior to COVID. But having said that, I'm not a business person. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. And I know, Dawn, you've emphasized the sound dilemma, but let me reinforce that one more time, is that sound is a difficult and complicated issue. And throwing out random decibel limits at the property line is not the right answer. Typically, for any kind of commercial or development or industrial facility, noise restrictions are meant to be noise generated at the facility at the boundary layer of the property above background. So you need to hire a consultant. They need to do a comprehensive background analysis. And then there needs to be a discussion about what the La Venta Inn generates itself. And that becomes the noise restriction. I mean, it's complicated, but it's a relatively straightforward science. And I understand La Venta Inn, or the owners and operators of La Venta Inn, have done something like that. I would encourage the city to take a hard look at that analysis and see if they can and live with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have Kristen. No, wait, I think we've already heard from Kristen. Am I mistaken?
Is this another one or is it the same one?
Kristen, have we heard from you already?
You did hear from me. I was going to speak to something different. So I don't know what the rules are.
Hold on. I think we're really trying to give everyone just the 2 minutes. So I appreciate that. You're welcome to reach out to us, and we'll happily take your written or speak to you on the phone. And next I have KB.
Hi all, my name is Kristen Minder. I live at 701 Via Samonte. I want to take a moment to thank council, the neighbors, and representatives from the business for being on this call. Just want to make a note that my husband and I purchased our home during COVID. We were informed that the likelihood of surviving was unlikely or unknown at best. It did reopen, and we heard a few events since we've moved in, but to be totally frank, I think that La Venta has done a decent job of trying to keep the sound to minimum. That all said, there are evenings where it definitely went above what we expected it to be in terms of noise. And this is just us living on 701 Via Samonte. I encourage the city council members for the ad hoc committee to just take a moment to listen to those that live closer and understand what they've been through in the last several years. Also, I understand that this place is of significance and importance to many people in the community and to Mark and his family. What I would recommend in that instance would be to put this building on a registry so that it can stay with the community for many years to come. From that, I would like to note that my husband and I really hope that the ad hoc committee and the neighbors who have presented some really wonderful recommendations can work together to find a solution that works for not only the business, but for all the neighbors that live in the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And last we have Margarita, or Marguerite, excuse me. I'm having trouble unmuting here. There we go. I don't think that's working. I'm not able to unmute her. Are you, Dawn?
No. Oh, let me try this. Nope.
I guess it looks like that's our last commenter. So Marguerite, you're welcome to reach out to us. We seem to be having technical issues. Maybe you don't have audio. And she does appear to have audio. I don't know. In any event, I think that wraps up more or less what we're doing. I want to thank everyone so much for coming out tonight and sharing your opinions with us. Our public comment period continues through February 8th. As I've mentioned numerous times, Dawn and I are at your disposal if you want to reach out to us either by email or you prefer to a phone call. I'd be happy to meet with anyone. I won't speak for Dawn, but she probably would too. Anything you want to add, Dawn, before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate I just appreciate everyone's involvement and attendance and willingness to share their thoughts respectfully, to help us understand all the different aspects. It's a complicated topic. It's a very highly emotional topic for many. And I just appreciate everyone's sharing information and patience as we cull through all the information and come up with a recommendation for council and to join in and participate in that.
Definitely a complicated topic. No question about that. I appreciate all the input we've got. We've got a lot to think about, and we will do everything we can to keep you guys informed, as we prepare to come up with a recommendation. And with that, thank you all so much again, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.